For the 3 months of the long, hot summer of 1940, the Royal Air Force and the Luftwaffe, the Air Force of Nazi Germany, fought an epic battle in the skies over southeast England. Britain seemed hardly well prepared, and Germany was triumphantly victorious in Europe. Yet by the end of the summer, the Luftwaffe was in retreat. Britain had defended her skies and prevented Germany from carrying out its plan for an invasion of the mainland. How did it happen? The heroic myth insists the victory was all due to a few plucky pilots and their marvelous Spitfire aircraft. Now, new evidence revealed by the latest scientific technology offers us a surprising new explanation for Germany's defeat. In the first 10 months of the Second World War, Germany had known nothing but dazzling success and conquest. First, Poland surrendered. Then in 1940, the Western nations, including Holland, Belgium and France, all fell to the Nazi invasion.
By the end of June, Germany has essentially conquered France. Britain now faces the entire might of Germany on her own.
What absolutely shocked the British people was, we're going to be at war with Hitler very, very quickly.
Hitler began to prepare his invasion, codenamed Operation Sea Lion. Germany's plan was to transport 160,000 troops across the Channel in 2,000 barges and ships. To achieve this safely, Germany first needed to establish air superiority. With 3,000 bombers and fighters in his fleet against a mere 600 British planes, Hermann Göring, the commander-in-chief of the Luftwaffe, never doubted Germany's victory.
Göring was supremely confident, and his belief that his Luftwaffe was more or less invincible had been greatly inflated by its successes over Poland and France and the Low Countries.
But time was pressing. Germany needed control of the skies before bad weather in the autumn made the Channel crossing hazardous. On the 14th of July, Germany inaugurated a series of air raids. Bombers, accompanied by Messerschmitt fighters, targeted Royal Air Force bases. As wave after wave of Luftwaffe bombers darkened the skies, pilots like Geoffrey Wellham felt like David standing against a German Goliath. Wellham was only 19 when the battle started.
It was awe-inspiring to see this mess of Luftwaffe coming towards you. 150 plus, like a lot of nets on a summer evening. And above them, swirling round like little midges, were the 109 escorts. And you thought, God, where do we start on this lot?
But 2 months later, on the 17th of September, Operation Sea Lion was abruptly abandoned. The Luftwaffe had failed to gain air superiority. There would be no invasion of Great Britain. The Battle of Britain proved to be one of the most important battles of the 20th century, and a pivotal moment in the Second World War. It was the moment when the Nazis could have conquered Great Britain, but failed to do so.
Winning the Battle of Britain was of profound significance to the ultimate Allied victory in World War II. The ultimate Allied victory in World War II would have been far more tenuous and difficult to achieve had the Battle of Britain been lost.
The odds against Britain being so enormous, how was this crucial victory accomplished? For more than 60 years, the legend has held sway that Britain was unprepared for the duel, and that what made the final difference was the dashing bravery of her young pilots and their fantastic little plane, the Spitfire.
Once you got the Spitfire underneath you and you flew it You felt part and parcel of the aeroplane. It said to you, I'm on your side, and the Merlin engine in front, I won't let you down.
But is it possible that one type of fighter plane could have made so much difference? Dave Southwood, a test pilot instructor, has no doubt about the capabilities of the 1940s fighter. He's flown it many times.
It's an absolutely tremendous aeroplane. Joy to fly, and it always will be one of the most charismatic aeroplanes that has ever been built.
Its chief opponent was the German fighter, the Messerschmitt 109, rightly respected for its speed and firepower. During the summer of 1940, these two fighters would clash in some of the most hotly contested aerial combat the world has ever witnessed. What gave British pilots the edge in the Battle of Britain? Was the Spitfire so superior to the Messerschmitt 109? Today, the few surviving examples are too fragile to test at their performance limits. But at the City University in London, a flight simulator has been programmed with the characteristics of each plane. Southwood is going to fly them as hard as they were ever flown in 1940. He wants to compare the three most important maneuvers: the turn, the dive, and the climb.
Hello, Dave, you there?
Yeah, you're loud and clear.
First, the turn.
Okay, so just going to roll into the turn. Increasing the power, and looking for a speed of about 145 knots.
The turn is measured in G forces. The higher the G, the tighter the turn. The tighter you can turn, the easier it is to get behind your enemy and shoot him down. Pushed to its limit, the Spitfire reaches 2.8 G, but for the Messerschmitt 109, only 2.4 G. In the turn, the Spitfire is a clear winner. Test 2, the dive. Both planes accelerate downwards at the same rate, but there's a problem for the Spitfire. No fuel injection means it must first roll into the dive to prevent the engine from cutting out.
3, 2, 1, now. Rolling.
This loses the Spitfire a crucial 3 seconds, which could make all the difference in a dogfight.
Rolling out.
The Messerschmitt wins this test. Finally, the climb. To maintain the advantage in a dogfight, the plane must always stay above its target.
Flying. Okay, I'm just going to progressively increase the power. So, go up to 3,000 feet.
Southwood discovers the Messerschmitt has a rate of climb 200 feet per minute greater than the Spitfire. Advantage Messerschmitt. Southwood's tests conclude that in 2 of the 3 most important respects, the German aircraft had the edge. Although the Spitfire could outturn its foe, the Messerschmitt could dive and climb faster than its adversary. This suggests that the Spitfire itself could not have been the reason the Royal Air Force won the Battle of Britain. But if it wasn't the plane, then maybe the salient difference lay in the manner in which the plane was flown and the distinct tactical formations employed by the RAF and the Luftwaffe. Britain used the so-called Vic formation. The leader was in front, and 2 other planes, known as wingmen, were tucked in behind him. The reason for this was simple.
These 3 aircraft could bring to bear 24 machine guns firing against an enemy bomber formation.
Did this formation give the British pilots a killer advantage? At King's College London, Professor Philip Sabin is trying to find out. In a simulation experiment, he takes the role of the leading plane and discovers an immediate drawback to the Vic formation.
Now, if we look around, we seem to be alone. But the problem is, the leader can't watch what's happening to his friends. He doesn't even know that they're there.
The Vic formation was also extremely difficult to sustain.
Flying in Vic required total concentration, tight Vics. I mean, we used to overlap our wingtips, you know, like that.
Which meant that keeping a sharp lookout for the enemy was almost impossible.
Now that look would be almost useless to see little dots in the distance, but it's thrown me off formation. And I've got to work for a long while now to get anywhere near position again.
With no lookout, the Spitfires became easy targets for the German fighters.
The V formation was such a rigid formation, and the wingmen had to spend so much time flying right on the leader that they very often were completely oblivious to what was happening outside of the perspective they had of that leader and perhaps the target ahead of them. And as a result, losses were very, very high.
Germany flew the Schwarmer, or finger four formation. How did this formation compare?
It basically consisted of a leader, and he had his own little element consisting of him as leader and his wingman, and then a leader of the second element and his wingman.
The German formation spread out across the sky and did not rely on concentrated firepower. Professor Sabin discovers that this formation has several advantages.
Now, we're not really free to look around everywhere. The point is we don't need to. We only need to look at the leader, and we can easily see anybody coming behind him. So they will take care to make sure that nobody's sneaking up behind us. We, meanwhile, will take care that nobody is sneaking up behind them.
What the Luftwaffe had realized was the crucial importance of pilots protecting each other in a dogfight. Just 22 years old at the time of the battle, German fighter pilot Günther Rahl understood the importance of this all too well.
When he attacks a target, the leader, he will be protected by a wingman. If the wingman has a target, he will be protected by the leader, you know?
The German formation was shown to be superior to the British on two counts. It was safer and it was easier to fly. So much so that it is still used by air forces around the world today. These two tests demonstrate clearly that the iconic Spitfire could not have been the reason for the victory of the RAF in the Battle of Britain. The answer must lie somewhere else. Germany's defeat in the Battle of Britain has often been attributed to Britain's heroic pilots and to their Spitfires. But our tests have shown that the Messerschmitt 109 was a more agile plane and the German formation strategy far superior. Günther Rahl, however, remembers a particular problem frequently encountered by German pilots like himself. That was getting home again across 25 miles of open sea.
We had losses over the British Channel, or they made it just to the beach in France and made a belly landing on the beach.
Why did this happen? Although the Messerschmitt 109 theoretically had enough fuel to get to and from London, it sometimes ran out before the pilots could reach their bases in northern France. At the Willy Messerschmitt Museum in Germany, a 109 engine reveals why. At cruising speed, 1800 RPM, it takes 75 seconds to use up just over a gallon of fuel. Fill the tank up again and crank up the engine to 2,800 RPM, the maximum speed possible in a dogfight, and the same amount of fuel is used in just 30 seconds. German pilots confronted an agonizing dilemma. If they actually engaged in combat with the British planes, they risked running out of fuel. And then they might be forced to crash land in enemy territory, or worse still, ditch in the sea.
Even in a rough fight, you have to watch the fuel gauge, how much is in, you know, because he knows exactly what amount he needs to go back to his home station.
That put the Germans at an unsettling psychological disadvantage.
The minute you arrived over Britain, you were already thinking, when do I actually have to break out of this situation and get back home? There were a lot of things here that psychologically added to the burden of the German fighter pilot. which really reduced the effectiveness of German combat power.
But the aerial dogfight between fighter planes was only one part of the Battle of Britain. German bombers played a critical role and were expected to be a decisive element of the Nazi invasion plan. The Luftwaffe's primary objective was to destroy the RAF on the ground, obliterating the aircraft before they could take off. For precision bombing, nothing could beat the plane that had conquered nations, the Junkers Stuka dive bomber.
Junkers Ju-87 Stuka is the main dive bomber for the German army. It is the flying artillery of the Blitzkrieg.
It had a terrifying approach, literally.
Just as Stuka enters its dive, it switches on the siren and it generates this horrendous screaming sound. Anybody who's underneath it, they know when a Stuka's arriving. The bomb is released in the vertical position and is delivered very accurately onto its target.
But the Stuka had a drawback.
When it gets to the bottom of the dive, the pilot is literally blacked out by the G-forces. This thing is pulled out of its dive by an automatic pilot. The aircraft is doing just over 100 miles an hour. It's below 1,000 feet.
Flying at such a low altitude and with no land-based artillery to protect it, the Stuka became easy prey for British fighters.
The RAF were shooting these things at the sky in their hundreds.
The Luftwaffe, having been established as a tactical air force, usually working in tandem with its advancing army, found that these aircraft that had performed so well in conquering most of Europe were proving less successful in Britain.
They're not operating in cooperation with the German army in the Battle of Britain because the German army is on the wrong side of the English Channel.
On the 19th of August, after mounting losses, Goering had no choice but to withdraw the Stuka. Despite the loss, the Luftwaffe still had 1,500 medium-range bombers at its disposal. Victory against a reportedly undefended Britain should have been simple. But Jack Livesey has found this document of 1923, the Fighter Zone Map. Top secret until the 1970s, it suggests that Britain had in fact been planning her air defences before Hitler rose to power.
You had the beginning of the British airfield structure and the British air defense network structure as early as the middle 1920s.
But were those defences effective? Eager to track down the evidence, Jack Livesey has visited Kenley Airfield, 30 miles south of London, to see what remains of it. It was one of 29 airfields set up across the south of England in the 1920s and 30s, and was known as a sector station. Its operations room, repair facilities, and 6 fighter squadrons made it a prime target for the Luftwaffe. Unlike the Polish Air Force, which was totally unprepared for a large-scale assault and was destroyed by German planes in just 40 minutes, today's evidence shows Britain was ready for the bomber attacks.
And I suspect, judging by the size of the bolts, it was twin Lewis guns.
40 Lewis guns defended Kenley Airfield, their positions prudently chosen.
It's not a bad view from the top.
No,
here,
it's
either.
not. Is it? Field of fire, forget about all the trees.
Yeah.
These are all grown up in 60 years. You can cover, what, a 90-degree arc of fire?
60 years on, other evidence still survives.
Is this a Pickett Hamilton?
Yep.
Ah.
One of 3.
The Pickett-Hamilton fort was a pillbox gunnery post concealed underground. Hydraulically powered, it could be raised quickly in the event of an attack.
Oh, yeah, all the pump and everything is still there. Oh, yes.
And, of course, a very large hydraulic jack in the middle.
Yeah, because they come up to about waist height, don't they?
Yeah.
When raised, its circular shape gave a fantastic view.
Right beside the main runway to defend it. So a great field of fire.
Just about every airfield in Britain had at least 2 or 3 of these things.
Yes.
These little forts could be found in airfields all over England. They were mounted with Lewis machine guns intended to bring down low-flying bombers. But even more effective against a low-level attack was the 40mm Bofors anti-aircraft gun. With its 360-degree turning circle, this gun was ideal for tracking enemy bombers.
He can whip the gun round, tracking the speed of enemy aircraft up to 350 miles an hour.
Its rapid firing mechanism was revolutionary in its day.
The guy on the back is the loader. He's got to keep up. He's got to keep the shells going in at 120 rounds a minute.
Its range of up to 12,000 feet made the Bofors gun invaluable against low-level attacks, but it acted best as a protective shield for the airfield.
It'll deter them from coming anywhere near. They can't drop the bombs, they can't hit the target. The RAF can then do its job.
But there were only 200 of these guns dotted around airfields and other installations in the south of England. Such a small number was not sufficient to stop all the bombers breaking through and destroying precious aircraft on the ground. Instead, the RAF had another and rather more simple stratagem for national defence. A brilliant innovation that would make destroying the British Air Force on the ground a rather difficult task. As the struggle for air superiority continued over England through the summer of 1940, the German Luftwaffe was discovering that victory over Great Britain would not be as swift as its previous conquests.
This battle, which is seen as a battle that would simply take a few days at most, now all of a sudden starts to stretch out into weeks. It starts to stretch out possibly into months.
Part of the problem was that German bombers were unable to eliminate British fighters on the ground, even though they had done so successfully in Poland and in France. Before the Battle of Britain, aircraft were parked in close proximity to each other in neat rows. This enabled maintenance crews to carry out repairs and essential servicing quickly and efficiently. But it also left the planes vulnerable. At a ballistics testing facility, an experiment using 1:10 scale models of the Spitfire shows why. Lieutenant Colonel Simon West positions the aircraft as they would have been before the Battle of Britain, in tight rows. A scaled-down charge is placed on the ground close to the planes and detonated by remote control to mimic the effect of a bomb.
One.
Well, that's a classic crater, isn't it? Mm-hmm. Now, as for this first aircraft, well, complete destruction. Let's have a look at that one.
Okay.
Oh, well, again, you can see what we've got is major structural damage. The fuselage and the wings have actually broken apart, as well as fragmentation. Let's have a look at some of the others.
As the row is inspected, it is clear that fragments from the first destroyed aircraft have ricocheted down the line, damaging the others.
And a big rip across the middle. So, bit of repair work on that one, I think.
What was different in 1940? The RAF still needed to have planes in close proximity to each other to enable crews to carry out repairs. How could they make them less vulnerable? At Kenley Airfield, Livesey and Granger have stumbled across the answer. E-pens.
So this is the rear entrance?
Yeah, front dispersal huts out in there, through into the actual E-pens.
The E-pens were brick, concrete and earth mounds in the shape of a capital E, each bay of which could accommodate 2 aircraft.
Seen many photographs of these pens being strafed and so on. Do you reckon they were very effective?
I think so, especially with the centre protection there, and also effective because this is an area that can do on-airfield servicing rather than in the hangars.
How much protection did the E-pens offer? This time, West places the bomb within one of the bays of a model E-pen.
3, 2, 1, firing.
Right, well, direct hit, this time inside the E-pen, and the plane that was here has disappeared into many pieces across the other side of the pen. This second plane has again been structurally damaged, and quite a lot of fragmentation effect here as well. Let's look at the other side. Well, there doesn't appear to be any damage to either. There's a bit of dust on that, but these two aircraft have survived as a result of that central partition between the two bays.
The E-pens, simple though they were, provided excellent protection to parked aircraft from ricocheting bomb damage. And they had a further advantage.
From the photographs I've seen, there's not a lot of the aircraft showing, and you're not over it for very long.
That's very
so
true,
your time to acquire the target is much, much shorter.
E-pens rendered German bombing less damaging than it had been in mainland Europe. But these factors alone cannot account for Britain's survival or explain Germany's failure. There was, however, another strand to Britain's defences. It wasn't a piece of hardware, but a system that mastered the essential task of coordinating national defences.
They had to find a way of finding out where the enemy bombers were. They had to find a way of getting the fighters to actually intercept the bombers, and they had then to bring the fighters home again.
Once safely across the English Channel, the German planes took only minutes to reach the airfields. But the Spitfire needed as much as 13 minutes to climb above the enemy in order to reach a suitable altitude from which to attack. So the RAF needed to develop a structure to give them plenty of warning and a head start. The RAF had set up Fighter Command in 1936. It had overall responsibility for the air defence of the nation.
Fighter Command was divided into 4 groups. There was 13 Group covering the north of England and Scotland, and then 12 Group covering the industrial Midlands, and then in the south there was 10 Group covering the southwest down to Cornwall, and the most important of all, with about half of Fighter Command strength, 11 Group covering the southeast and London.
During the Battle of Britain, the area covered by 11 Group saw most of the action. It was directly responsible to Fighter Command's headquarters at Bentley Priory. Here, the information on incoming German attacks was received by one of Fighter Command's best-kept secrets, radar.
Now, all around the coast, by 1940, there were 2 chains of radar stations, RDF stations as they were known, stretching right up from Scotland all the way down the coast of East Anglia. And they were looking out over the coast and over northern France up to a range of about 100 miles.
Radio waves from the radar station, reflected from enemy aircraft, gave 20 minutes warning of a German raid coming in from northern France.
All the information came in to Fighter Command headquarters at Bentley Priory in Stanmore in Middlesex into a crucial room called the filter room.
Within minutes, information on enemy aircraft movements went from the filter room onto a plotting table, was passed to the groups, and was then passed down the chain of command to sector stations like Kenley. From the sectors, the information was rushed to the squadrons, and the fighters were hastily scrambled, with as much as 15 minutes remaining for them to reach a safe altitude. Radar gave the RAF a crucial advantage, allowing pilots those vital minutes in which to prepare to intercept the enemy. But as the Germans attacked the RAF, they also targeted the radar stations. Avis Parsons, a radar plotter, was on duty when the radar station at RAF Poling was hit.
Suddenly this voice said, "Poling, that plot is right on top of you." And I said, "You don't need to tell me, I can hear them." And that's when they started diving. And they dived, they dropped all they had, and drove straight out again.
The station was damaged, but mysteriously, in spite of the success of the raids, attacks on the radar stations stopped. Horst Bug, an expert in intelligence, thinks he has discovered why. In Germany's state archives, he's found documents that reveal the fact that German intelligence didn't understand the relationship between radar and the British air defenses.
They had no exact information of how it was connected with fighter command. And therefore, in a report on the air situation of July 1940, the radar was not mentioned at all.
And there was more. In his research, Boog interviewed a veteran of the Luftwaffe, General Paul Deichmann.
He said, we thought that the operation rooms of these radar stations were underground, but they were still above ground.
Radar had actually been a much easier target than the Germans realized.
The Germans thought that they couldn't do anything against radar, and it was like looking for needles in a haystack, so they just abandoned it.
Was this a colossal mistake?
Had the Germans consistently continued to attack radar, that might well have borne fruit for them.
For 60 years, radar has been considered the most important element in fighter command system. Hitler's decision to stop attacking radar stations was believed to be a fatal strategic error and the key to the British victory. But Stephen Bungay doesn't think that radar was the decisive factor.
One of the heaviest days of activity in the whole of the Battle of Britain was the 18th of August, when a small force launched an attack on this airfield, Kenley.
This could have been disastrous, but Fighter Command was ready for them. Its commanders had the Observer Corps, a group of volunteers who used nothing more sophisticated than their eyes, a weapon Winston Churchill called the Mark I eyeball, and also a simple device, the theodolite. Observer Corps volunteers were stationed in fields, on hills, and on rooftops all around the country. Scouring the countryside, amateur historian Dennis Bates has discovered that constructive method and intelligent thought went into positioning the Observer Corps posts.
If we look over there, that is towards France. The post where I'm standing would see the hordes of the Luftwaffe coming from France. Behind them would come the defending fighters from Kenley, just over the hill.
Every post was equipped with a telephone. At the time, this was cutting-edge technology. And to each post, no matter how remote, a landline was laid.
It came across the fields on telegraph poles, down to a little box, wind a handle, and you were live.
And 24 hours a day, every day, whatever the weather, someone from the Observer Corps stood watch.
30,000 people in 1,000 posts right across the country, reporting into 32 centres. And the Observer Corps centres would give their information directly to the sectors and to group simultaneously.
This system meant that everybody, including the pilots, could be constantly updated on the enemy's position.
Imagine a pilot taking off, he's up in the air. What do I do next? He needs to be told from the ground where to go, at what height, who he was going to fight, who he was going to attack. And he needed that information, and only a body of civilians could provide that.
John Elgar Winnie, a former Observer Corps volunteer, has set up the tools of his trade at one of the old posts.
John, hello.
Heads out there, old friend.
Now, the original post instrument?
It is.
By lining up the sight of the post instrument with the aircraft, the observer can measure its height.
Until you actually got the aircraft in the sight. You read your scale on the height bar there.
And this,
at the same time, a pointer on a grid representing the ground could indicate exactly where the enemy was.
So with all this equipment, you can report not only the direction, the accuracy in height, the number of aircraft, and what else?
Yeah. Hostile or friendly.
Yes.
Information from both radar and the Observer Corps was fed through the system to the whole of Fighter Command.
And therefore this whole system, fitted together through a dedicated network of telephone lines, crisscrossing with each other, with every element in the system able to talk to every other element, but everybody being very clear about what their responsibility was within it, and forming what was effectively the world's first intranet.
The implications were enormous.
You can wait until you have seen when and where the Germans are coming. If you did not have the system, then you would have been forced to maintain constant standing patrols in the air all the time.
Within seconds, information was passed through the operations rooms via the telephone, and this was one of the secrets of this system's success.
The simple black telephone gave them the ability, I think, to get through just enough information, but not too much.
Even when the operations room at Kenley was bombed, the vital chain of information wasn't broken. In the town closest to Kenley, Stephen Bungay has met John Yates, a communications engineer in the battle.
This is where Camp B was located.
That is correct.
Is that right?
Yes, yeah. I remember this.
There was a secret operations room housed in what was formerly a butcher's shop, and it was John Yates's job on a daily basis to ensure that the telephone line remained intact.
They have you shitting up there.
Well, it wasn't very easy.
The telephone cables were strung from tree to tree all the way to Kenley Airfield. It seems fairly makeshift to our sophisticated eyes, but when a sector station was attacked, it was crucial, and it worked.
If we hadn't had communications, we would have lost. Because it's like calling for the fire brigade, but the phone doesn't work. It was of vital importance, and without that contact, the aircraft could not do their job.
The huge telecommunications system that was Fighter Command was unique to Britain. It was the most significant difference between Britain and the European countries that had surrendered so swiftly to Nazi aggression. Nevertheless, in September, victory seemed not at all certain to the men on the ground.
We never thought we'd win it, because one didn't know what was round the corner. If we suddenly had a blitz by the Germans, we could have lost everything, and we're back to square one. You didn't know how severe that corner was.
Then, on the 7th of September, 8 weeks into the Battle of Britain, Hitler dramatically changed his strategy. By September 1940, the RAF was exhausted, and the loss of so many of its young people was taking its toll.
You put behind you thoughts of friends missing and unaccounted for. Then you had to carry on the next day, of course, if you'd survived.
On the 7th of September, Germany ceased bombing the RAF and began to bomb London. Hitler believed that a blitzkrieg assault on the capital would be the final blow and that he would triumph over Britain soon after.
They believe that they have reduced Fighter Command's strength very seriously, and that Fighter Command may have as few as 200 operational aircraft left. They therefore believe that if they go for London, Fighter Command will be forced to commit its very last reserves to a, if you like, a sort of climactic air battle over the capital, that the Luftwaffe will then shoot the remaining RAF fighters out of the sky, and that they will win the war.
But the RAF had in fact raised its strength to over 600 planes, with the help of increased production, which delivered on average 250 fighters a month. So Germany's estimates were incorrect, and the plan collapsed. Were the raids on London Hitler's fatal miscalculation?
It's often said that Fighter Command was saved by the bell, by the fact that the Germans attacked London on September the 7th.
Had Germany persisted in bombing airfields and radar stations, would Hitler have succeeded in bringing the RAF to its knees? Bungay contacted a systems engineer, Derek Hitchens, to see if he could build a computer model to attempt to answer this question. Hitchens has designed a complex systems model that examines statistics of the battle, aircraft numbers, reinforcements, tactics, and weather.
Well, the way I approached addressing that problem was to create
a number of successive months of operations, assuming that it went along very much as it had been doing.
Professor Hitchens has recreated the battle for the period from the beginning of August to the 7th of September, the hardest and most perilous time for the RAF. Having established what actually happened, he is able to extrapolate the likely pattern of attack over future months. He sees what would have happened had the Germans not shifted their attentions to London. The model shows that, far from being weakened, the RAF's strength would have remained solid.
It's actually reached a point at which it can keep going pretty much indefinitely. There is very little difference between the beginning and the end of that line. It's in a steady state for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 months.
Britain, it seems, was nowhere near defeat.
And the Luftwaffe has come to a grinding halt after about 100 days.
Far from being victorious, the model demonstrates that the Luftwaffe would have exhausted its resources.
That means that if the Luftwaffe had continued as it was going at the time at which it's supposed to have been succeeding, according to many, it would actually have destroyed itself in 3.5 months. And Fighter Command would still have been in being.
Attacking London was not Germany's fatal error. In fact, the Luftwaffe's entire offensive was misconceived.
When Germany came to grips with Britain, it was facing a nation that had something no other nation had ever previously had. It was facing a nation that had truly an integrated air defense network, what we today call an IADS, an integrated air defense system.
And this integrated air defense system was extremely robust.
The traditional command and control system is like a line. You can take a pair of scissors and cut it and bang, it's dead. But you try to make a net incapable of doing its work, and you've got to cut and cut and cut and cut until you've gone all the way round, and you've got to cut quite a big hole in it to disable it. And then imagine that this net is self-repairing, and as you go around cutting, the thing repairs itself as you cut.
This was the unique quality of Fighter Command during the Battle of Britain. It was the single most important factor in the nation's success. After 3 grueling months, on the 14th of October 1940, the battle was over. Nazi Germany had failed.
There was, I think, an element of arrogant overconfidence in the German military system. They knew that they were a highly trained, well-equipped, supremely motivated organization, but that blinded them to the little deficiencies, and all this came to hurt them deeply then during the battle.
Hitler put his invasion of Britain on hold, and instead he turned east to invade the Soviet Union. The full significance of what the country had achieved in the summer of 1940 only became clear in the years that followed.
Just after the war, at the Nuremberg trials, one of the German generals was asked a question of when he thought that Germany started to lose the war. Was it Stalingrad? And he said no, it was the Battle of Britain.
We had a very important job to do. We weren't going to lose. No way.
The long-held belief that an unprepared little island faced an unbeatable foe is not true. That a few brave pilots and their glorious Spitfires saved Britain is only part of the story. In reality, the battle was won by a series of German errors and by careful forward planning on the part of Great Britain, and above all, by her thoroughly modern and efficient air defense system.